thank you everybody for being here, and for being on the Future Learn course. Really appreciate your being on that, and those of you who are taking part in the forum chats and sharing information. It's really great to see so many people offering up advice and information and asking questions. I always get a great deal of information from folks every time we do the course, and this is the 10th run of the course, so lots of information coming through all the time. So it's really great. This is the 4th week of the course, so we've been doing genetic genealogy and looking at some of the standards of evidence. Next week we'll get into adding context into your research, so looking at maps and newspapers, but also looking at secondary sources, so things like histories and things like that, and how to find those and use those. And then on the 6th week, we'll start looking at how to write up your research and present it, get into referencing and do things like that. So a lot more things coming up in the next couple of weeks. So do stay tuned in to the course. Would be great. So I know a lot of folks have DNA questions, and we very thankfully have Graham here, who's one of our DNA experts on the course, and more than just the course. He's a true DNA expert. Yeah, this is a very different format for us. Usually we're sat side by side at the studio at the university, so it's strange to not be able to look and see him right there. But Graham, I think I'm just gonna shoot over to you. I'll keep an eye on the questions and keep cutting and pasting those into the Excel spreadsheet. So when you're done, perhaps we can come back to those, and I can maybe do some of the questions from that non-DNA related. So, okay, right. I will mute myself and let Graham go at it. So.
Okay, fine. Thanks very much. So we've got quite a number of questions coming in various aspects. So I'm going to split them up into, we've got some sort of general questions, which I'll start with. There's a couple of, we might term ethical questions. We've got some specifically on ATDNA and some on YDNA and mtDNA. So let's have a look at some general questions first of all, and there's two quite closely related questions here. We've got one from John Hammond, and he's concerned about wanting a simple explanation of the subject area, really. He's asking, is there such a thing as a genealogy for dummies, as you get in many subjects? And he's saying there's so many websites on the topic that he could be busy for 10 years on that. And that relates closely to what David is asking as well, David Murdoch. And he's wondering how he would find his way around the complexities of the topic, and makes a comment that I would agree with, which is that the onus should be on the testing companies to provide information. Yes, because we're paying for it. Well, yeah, I would say, David, you're absolutely right. I do feel that the testing companies really should provide user-friendly information to their customers, who are paying customers, as you know, and there is rather a lack of this type of user-friendly information, I would feel, provided by the companies. So the answer to these two questions really is to try and seek out educational material and educate yourself in the topic. So various things that I think we may have suggested, some of these within the MOOC. So you have books. So there's the sort of standard books at the moment. There's Blaine Bettinger's Family Tree DNA Guide to DNA Testing. And then there's also a book that I edited myself with four other contributors, which came out last year, called Tracing Your Ancestors Using DNA. These are probably the most up-to-date ones. In the book I edited, one of the major aims was to try and make this as user-friendly as possible. Try and use language that was readily accessible to folk, not requiring a scientific background or anything like that. And we feel that from a number of comments we've had that we've probably achieved that reasonably well. So you might want to consider, if you don't already have these, thinking about these books. But other than that, beyond that, probably the major way of finding information to educate yourself in the topic is online, of course. There are many good genetic genealogy blogs available, which can be very informative. So you've got blogs from people like Blaine Bettinger again. There's Roberta Estes and Debbie Kennett in the UK and a lot of others. And you'll find a lot of useful information there. The type of format that these are in, of course, in blogs, they tend to be very specific to one particular topic. So they don't give you a sort of integrated introduction to the subject as a whole. And your other possible way might be, we do run 2 short 8-week online courses from Strathclyde University. And I think I noticed a question coming in just as we're about to start on wondering about the difference between these 2 courses. So we have genetic genealogy, an introduction, and we have understanding autosomal DNA. Basically, both of the courses do provide an initial introduction to genetic genealogy in general, with the introductory course. We then tend to focus more after that on Y-DNA, and we do cover a little bit on mitochondrial DNA. The understanding autosomal DNA, as the title would suggest, we do focus after a couple of introductory sessions, we do focus mainly on ATDNA. But both of these do have some coverage of the other types of tests. So hopefully that gives you some ideas how you might follow up and get a better understanding of the topic. Okay, so that was John and David asking about that. Now, I have another question from John. Let me see which I want to take next. Oh yes, he's asking about basically definitions, that it would be very helpful to have definitions around some of the major terms that we use in the topic. So the types of tests, so Y-DNA, ATDNA, mtDNA, things like haplogroups, markers, STRs, and SNPs, and that type of thing. And he also mentions the chart of expected centimorgan ranges. Yes, I think this would be actually a good idea if we could perhaps add in a fairly simple glossary to the materials on the MOOC, and maybe we could even try and get something up as a resource for you before this current run of the MOOC ends. So we'll see if we can organise that for you fairly soon. Again, the up-to-date books do have glossaries. So again, Blaine Bettinger's book and the book I edited that came out last year both have glossaries, which should be helpful to you. There's also the ISOG wiki, which I think we mentioned in the MOOC materials. And that again gives you definitions of many of these topics. I would say that maybe some of them are not the easiest to understand perhaps, but generally the ISOG wiki is a very good source of material of that type if you're looking for information on a particular topic. And usefully it usually gives very many links to web resources on the various topics, ranging from material for the beginner in genetic genealogy to sort of academic articles. So quite a range of resources it will point you to. the question that John also raised in that question on expected centimorgan ranges. Now, the best reference for centimorgan ranges is the Shared Centimorgan project. It's a major project run by Blaine Bettinger, and you can get access to that on the DNA Painter website. So within the DNA Painter website, the Shared Centimorgan project, and that will give you ranges of centimorgans for different relationships. It's based on many thousands of test results and actually has just been revised within the last week or so, I think, and referencing it to even more test results. Okay, now there's a question from Jean, which is also a general question. Let me just access that one. Yes. Oh, Jean was asking, it's just a historical one in a way. Jean Atkinson, why was the human genome changed or modified after the Black Death? Okay, so this basically is a clear example of natural selection. So the Black Death, as you probably know, took place in the 14th century, and it was much, much worse than what we're encountering today. For example, it's thought that possibly up to a third of the population in England died as a result of the Black Death, and it went on and on for quite a long period of time. So as far as the genetics of it are concerned, some individuals in the 14th century basically carried genes which gave them a strong immunity to the Black Death, and others didn't. And so those that did not have these particular genes giving them immunity were unable to survive, whereas the survivors passed on their genes to succeeding generations. And so some lines of descent continued, while others became extinct as a result of that epidemic. Okay, right, I think that concludes probably the general questions. Now I'm going to take a couple that I would term ethical questions. We've got one from Vicky Phillips. Can DNA information be used for illegal purposes by a third party when it has been uploaded onto a site? Right, ethics is a particularly tricky question as regards genetic genealogy, and there are lots of pros and cons and lots of aspects to it. So I can't delve too deeply into that today, but I would say in answer to that question, in general, probably not, because in most cases on the test companies' websites, in most cases, the tests, the data from the tests cannot be linked to an individual. And so without a great deal of research and hacking and so on to various things that I think would be very, very difficult for them to be put to illegal purposes. Okay, the other question, which is sort of related to ethics, I suppose, but this was from Jean Atkinson. She's asking, what is the etiquette for contacting someone out of the blue and requesting to know if we have a common ancestor? Yes, it can be tricky, and the experience of many folk that try to contact matches is that often quite a large proportion of them don't respond. Can be various reasons for that. For example, 23andMe test takers quite often have a particular interest in the genetics of health, and that may be the reason they've tested, and they may not really have an interest in genealogy, so they might not be so inclined to reply. Ancestry, which is obviously by far got the largest database. Many of the folks that have tested with Ancestry seem to have been attracted to it by the what many folk refer to as the ethnicity, or what we would call admixture. And again, they may only be interested in that aspect and not strictly interested in genealogy. But in the hope that you might get a reply, obviously you would want to try and contact matches. So I would say briefly, the approach you should be taking in these contacts is try and explain in simple terms what the matching shows on the test company's website. Give some brief details of your own ancestry, so information such as the various ancestral surnames you have, what the geographical origins of those surnames are in your lines, and just ask if any of the information you've provided gives them any clues or suggestions as to where the link might come, which ancestral line the connection might lie in. Okay. Now, so that's taking care of that category of question. Now, I'm going to move on now into quite a number of questions specifically relating to ATDNA, because that, as you'll know, that is the major type of test that the vast number of test takers have now taken. So take a question, a couple of questions from John, first of all, John Hammond. So, right, he's asking about the uploading or non-uploading of trees on test sites. And he's saying this seems to be of the DNA test seems to be a bit limited use if there's no associated trees. Well, certainly trees, and it's particularly ancestry we're probably talking about here, trees can be very helpful to give clues to the possible genealogical links. But you do have to keep in mind, of course, as well, that online trees can often be inaccurate or misleading, so be a bit wary about these as well. Sometimes some of the company websites may have a facility to list ancestral surnames that are being researched, and that again can be quite helpful and might give some clues to where the link might occur. Obviously, you would want to give priority if you're going to, as we were just talking about, emailing or trying to contact the matches. You probably want to give priority to those who have trees up, because they may already have given you some clue as to, through the surnames or through the geographical locations, may give you some clues as to where your common link might occur. So I think that probably takes care of that question from John. We had another question from John as well, wondering whether as time goes on, with more and more testing happening, could we get a point to where the probability of relationships is a bit more precise? So as you'll know, on the test company websites at the moment, you'll get designations such as matches that say maybe second to fourth cousin, third to fifth cousin, that type of thing. John's wondering if that could be refined a bit more as more and more people test. The problem with this is it's not really possible to define these any more accurately purely based on the test results themselves, just because of the way recombination works and inheritance works. It's just biologically the case, and it's not going to be really possible to define any further. What may happen though is if more and more known relatives test and that information goes up on the test company's websites, then it may become possible to get a bit more clarity and precision in predicted relationships based on that. Okay, now I have a question from Colin next, which is quite a specific one about his own specific case here. He's asking about his maternal grandfather's family, because he's found that he's got very few matches that trace back from the maternal grandfather's family. I'm presuming that really what his question is was his maternal grandfather, or the person he believes to be his maternal grandfather, actually his biological grandfather or not? Because he does say that his grandfather left the family home before his mother was born and was having another family at that time. Now, the way to confirm that, and it should be possible if you can find suitable people willing to take tests, the thing to do to confirm this would be to try and find descendants of the supposed grandfather's second family. And if you can find them who might be willing to take an autosomal DNA test, they should turn out to be close matches if the supposed grandfather is the biological grandfather, because the relationship between yourself, Colin, and these other relatives is going to be pretty close. So they're going to be either half aunts or half uncles, or possibly, if they're next generation down, half cousins. And so there should be still quite a considerable match that would show up in an ATDNA test. So that would be the way forward with that question. Now, let me come to a question from Jean. I think we have another question from Jean. Let me see. Right. So Jean has a question relating to trying to trace male line, but not using Y DNA. In her example, she had a mother and two daughters who have tested, and she's wondering if that can be used to try and trace the male line. Well, yes, to a certain extent. So the segments of autosomal DNA carried by the two daughters, but not carried by the mother, will be those inherited from the father by a process of elimination. So it should be possible to identify matches on the paternal side of the family. But if you do want to follow up research into the paternal side over a long period of time, then really the Y-DNA research is going to be essential. But in the shorter, the more recent time span, yes, you could use that to an extent to eliminate the DNA and refine it to the DNA that's come from the paternal line. Right, now one final question I want to take on ATDNA, which comes from Katie, if we can just locate that one. Ah, yes. So she's saying she's using Ancestry, and she's found evidence of a great aunt that we weren't aware of previously, and that the daughter of the great aunt's contacted her. She's waiting to correspond with her. And Katie has done a DNA test, and she's wondering if the supposed great aunt were to take a test, would that show possible matches? Or would it be better to get her father to do one? Yes, it's a fairly close relationship, and so if the suspected great aunt were to take an ATDNA test, it should definitely show a clear match with yourself, Katie, if she is actually your great aunt. If you were to get your father to take a test also, I mean, he is a generation closer, and so obviously he would be an expected nephew. That would define the match even more clearly, and there'd be a greater amount of matching, a greater amount of centimorgans matching there. Okay, basically ATDNA tests can give a clear indication of close relationships. So up to around about second cousin level, it can be pretty definite, your result. Beyond that, it starts to become a bit more challenging, and you really need to think about testing more relatives and studying the various segments and refining your results. Okay, now I'm going to move on now to a couple of questions which relate really to both Y-DNA and mtDNA. So we've got another one from John Hammond, which is saying he finds it strange that Y-DNA and mtDNA can go back 200,000 years without any DNA from persons from so far in the past. And how does it make the giant leap? So, yes, it is quite amazing actually. Now, so you have to remember in the case of autosomal DNA, test takers will only have inherited DNA from a fairly small proportion of their more distant ancestors. And that, of course, is because the amount inherited roughly halves at every generation. So once you get back beyond about 5 or 6 generations, the amounts are really, in most cases, quite small. And even further back, there will be many of your ancestors that you don't inherit any identifiable autosomal DNA from. But in the case of Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA, that is very different because these are passed down. So the Y-DNA is passed down the paternal line and the mtDNA is passed down the maternal line, and it's indefinite, the length of inheritance of that. Certainly there are small changes, small mutations over the centuries, but that portion of your DNA does come down from these people. And as a result, of course, it makes Y-DNA particularly useful for research into surnames, because similarly, as Y-DNA is passed down the male line, in most cases, surnames are passed down the male line. There may be reasons why names change, but in general, that is the case. Right, now another question, again from John on Y-DNA and mtDNA. He's asking, could a little bit more information be provided about a situation where ancestor can be determined with certainty as a male or female in the line up and down the tree? Now, I'm presuming, John, what you mean by that is that you are referring to Y-DNA and mtDNA tests. So just to clarify then, any matches, if you've taken a Y-DNA test, any matches that you get will be from unbroken male lines. So that's both your own male line stretching right back and also the male line of the match. And similarly with matches from an mtDNA test, so these will both your own and your match's ancestry will be matching on unbroken female lines, except for the very last link in the line, because of course mtDNA can be passed or is passed on to both male and female children by the mother, but they can't be passed on any further by the male. So the very last link to the actual test taker could be a male. So the test taker themselves may actually be a male. Right, so I hope that's clarified these issues a little bit on those tests. And finally, because we're using up our time here, I'm going to take one further question, which is from Robin Marshall, which is quite a specific one on Y-DNA. He's referring to a graphic that appeared in the course material. It was a CLD 51 graphic, which relates to the clan Donald. And he's asking, if someone was from that clan, how would they find out? How would you search the numbers and so on? Right, so your first step normally would be to take a basic, usually a basic 37 marker Y-DNA test. Now, in many cases, that would show matches with others, and hopefully most of these would carry the same surname. So quite often that may not be the case as well, but I would say probably in the majority of cases there will be a predominant surname amongst the matches, and that would usually confirm or indicate what the genetic ancestry is going to be. So if it's a particular clan you're looking for, you would hope that there'd be confirmation there that most of your matches carry that surname. Now, if they don't necessarily assume that you're not from that clan. There may be other reasons, and we can't go into the detail of that at the moment. But hopefully that would be the case. Sometimes it might be unclear from a 37 marker test, and you might need to upgrade to perhaps a 67 marker test or even a 111 marker test, and you may then be able to establish that. Going beyond that, you would be looking at doing SNP testing of some sort to identify if you carry the SNP, because Robin mentioned, as I said, a specific SNP, which is CLD51. The various ways of doing SNP testing. A test, an advanced test such as Big Y 700 is a very good test if you want to go to that length. A bit more expensive, obviously, but it can discover new SNPs. There are other ways in doing this, such as SNP packs or SNP panels, which will test on quite a large number of SNPs. But if you're fairly sure of a clan that you seem to be a member of, then that might be quite a good route to go down, and that will test for a group of SNPs. It is even possible to do individual SNP tests, and that can sometimes be a useful option in some cases if you're fairly confident or very confident you're going to test positive for that, then that would give you confirmation. It's also a question of weighing up the cost of these things. You know, you can think you're going to test for a SNP and you'll get confirmation, but you may find you test negative for it, and then you can start to accumulate significant costs if you start testing lots of individual SNPs. So, you know, you might be better to go for a SNP pack or even go for the full Big Y 700 test. Very often it's a good idea to be a member of a surname project for this type of thing, and to get advice from the project administrators on what the best route for testing would be. Right, so I think we could probably round off there with the questions I have, unless there are any urgent ones that have come in meantime. So pass back to Tahisha now. And
Yeah, Graham, I was just gonna say I've been cutting and pasting them, and I think there's some good more sort of general DNA questions, which I think some folks would find quite useful. Tom's asking, how reliable are the through link connections on Ancestry, which is something I've wondered about with mine as well.
Right, okay. I don't have very much direct experience of that. I think any of these sort of predictions that come from the testing companies, you have to take with caution, but I think very often they can give you clues and indicate where further research, often documentaries research, or possibly also further analysis of your test results as well, and the matches, it might be worth concentrating on. So yeah, I think they're useful as guidelines, but don't take them as necessarily 100%.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Right. So another one from Polly, and again, this is something that, yeah, I've struggled with too. She's taken a test through Ancestry, and she's been told you can import this test result into other genealogy sites. And
Hmm.
she's just curious about how to do that. I suppose I know that's
Right.
complex, but maybe just point her in the
Okay.
right direction.
Yes, yes. Most of the other major testing companies will accept uploads of data from other test companies, and also GEDmatch, the third party um, site for analysis of autosomal DNA test results. Um, Basically, what you have to do is download your raw data from, if we're talking about Ancestry, download the raw data from Ancestry and then upload to the other test company. And each of the test companies will have instructions on their websites about how to do that.
Mm.
There might be a small cost involved. It's usually pretty low if that is required. And you should be able to do that in that way. And GEDmatch as well, you can upload to.
Yeah, I actually think the help on Ancestry about how to download your raw data is pretty good too, because I looked at that
Hmm.
a little while ago to try to figure that out for myself and my mom. So,
Yeah,
um,
good,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay.
Right, let's see. A couple of other things here. Just so many. So Melanie's asking about her mom who has dementia, so she can't get informed consent from her.
Mm.
Would Melanie taking an mtDNA test be useful into looking into her ancestors? She's got some information back to somewhat grandmother. She's struggling to go further back now. So
Right,
mtDNA or autosomal, both.
right. Well, mtDNA is a bit limited in its use for genealogy as such because even exact matches on the full mtDNA sequence could be, you could be talking about 500 years back, even with an exact match. So, you know, it's more useful for looking at early origins, really, and you might be able to get information about what sort of geographical areas your maternal ancestry came from. More useful for that than strict genealogy if we're talking about the last 500 years. Um, Otherwise, though, autosomal test obviously is the other way. I mean, it's got a lot more general application for genealogy, particularly for the last 5 to 6 generations back. So I would suggest probably the autosomal is going to be the better option there. Yeah.
Okay, great. Right, we've got, yeah, probably can take a couple more. We're running up to our time, but
Yeah.
that's, yeah, we can probably take that because I think there's still a couple of good ones here. And I think this is, I didn't grab the name off of this one, but will my great uncle or his sons have the same Y DNA as me? Both are direct male lines from a common great grandfather.
Mhm. Yes, well, when you say the same, yeah, it might not be absolutely identical, because as you probably know, the Y-DNA does come down the unbroken male lines from thousands of years back, but there are slight variations over the centuries. Small mutations occur, and even there can be slight differences even between brothers. We've seen examples of that. Um, but in most cases, going back probably 2 or 3 generations or so, in very many cases, probably be exactly the same. To a great uncle, the chances are probably that it's going to be exactly the same, and from his sons, yeah, probably going to be very close.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've just got. Well, I mean, I suppose we can take a couple more, really. But Gregory's asking about getting aunts and uncles of his parents tested. I'm
Mhm.
wondering if it wouldn't really be helpful since he's already gotten both parents tested. The grandparents are dead, so.
All right. Okay. So this is presumably talking about autosomal here, I would imagine. Um, yes. I would really advise that with autosomal testing, in general, the more people you test, the more known relatives you
Mm,
test, the better, because you know, even siblings, they're sharing uh, roughly 50% of their DNA, siblings, but it's, you know, they're inheriting different portions, different segments from the parents. So even with two siblings, you can gather by testing a second sibling, you can get that extra portion of DNA to use for analysis purposes. And it's a general principle, really, that the more folk, the more known relatives you test, the more DNA you gather into your pool for analysis. So yeah, I would say in general, yes, if they're willing to test, yes, a good idea.
yeah, so the more the merrier, basically,
Yeah, really, yes,
is gonna help. Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Okay. Well, that's taking us up to about 7 minutes to the hour. Well, 6 minutes now. I know we've got some folks who have other meetings to go to at 5 o'clock, so want
Mhm.
to round off. So the as I said, the questions that were asked on the forums that we've not gotten around to answering here, I'll try to go back in and we'll answer those. I know there's a couple of some I've already actually started answering and giving responses to on the forums, and we'll go back in and do some of those other ones too. So we weren't able to get to everything, but I tried to particularly grab the more general ones from the ones you guys were putting on the group chat, and I know people are answering them themselves, which is wonderful in the group chat. So um, I would say, yeah, just look forward to the course continuing next week. We're getting into context, so moving a bit away from our strict primary sources and DNA, and getting into fun secondary sources, things like that. And then in the 6th week, we'll start looking more about how to organize and write up your work, and looking at charts and referencing and stuff like that. Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks again, everyone, for taking part. And in particular, thanks to Graham, who's done a fabulous job at answering those questions.
Mm,
Something
cute.
I certainly wouldn't be able to do personally. But yeah, and just thanks again to everybody for taking part in the course, and looking forward to the next 2 weeks and last of the course. So yeah, just take care and stay safe, and keep washing those hands.